y'all. Welcome back to the Lounge with Annette. So, I think I found a new book for April because, in my previous video that I just recently posted, I let you know the name of the book and why I stopped reading the previous book. So, we're going to get started, right? All right, so let's get started. Again, the title of the book is Beneath This Mask, and it's by Megan March. It is book one of the series, and it has 46 chapters. That is including an epilogue. And let's see. There. Okay, so it has a brief part of what the book is about. It says, former Navy fighter pilot, son of a congressman, successful businessman in my own right. With a resume like mine, women have never been a challenge until I met her. This sexy, tatted up bad girl wasn't part of my plans, but that punch to my gut every time I see her tells me I have to know more. She's a mystery, an enigma, a challenge. I'm going to figure out, and then I'm going to make her mine. We'll find out what she's hiding beneath this mask. Sounds interesting. Seems like it's going to be more than one person. It's like it's going to be multiple people. Okay, so like I did in my previous book, if I run across any words that I can't pronounce, then I'm going to have a definition video. Okay, are y'all ready? Let's go. Chapter 1, Charlotte. I stepped off the witness stand feeling like I've been skinned and gutted, my insides laid out for public viewing. I refused to meet my father's piercing aqua stare, the same one I saw every time I looked in the mirror. Instead, I focused on the sleeves of his navy pinstripe Armani suit jacket and his gaudy diamond cufflinks, winking in the buzzing fluorescent light of the courtroom. My father was a general, flanked by his army of $1,000 an hour defense attorneys. Not that they could save him. The disgust on the juror's face spoke louder than any cavorted defense they could mount. I slipped through the swinging wooden gates and glanced at my mother, sitting primly, ankles crossed and hands folded, in her favorite Chanel suit and tasteful gold jewelry. Lizette Augustin was quintessential picture of a woman standing by her man. She expected me to take the seat next to her, the seat I'd vacated hours before, hands sweating and stomach churning, to give my testimony and endure the brutal cross-examination. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't sit down and be the supportive, naive daughter anymore, so I kept walking. I didn't look at the gawky members of the press or the scornful sneers of the victims. I pushed open the heavy, carved wooden door and took my first deep breath of air that wasn't laced with lies. I was done with them, with this life, with all of it. It had all been a maliciously constructed fairy tale, and I've been too blind and trusting to see through the facade. I was done. Burning shame swamped me. The assistant U.S. attorney words rang in my ears. How does it feel to realize your privileged life has been paid for with other people's dreams? The objection came too late to prevent the cutting words, but no objection could erase the fact that he was right. My life had been paid for with money diverted from the hard-earned savings of tens of thousands of innocent victims. Moreover, Bernie Madoff, Alistair Augustin figured out a better way, exponentially more complex and devastating, because the moment the scheme started to topple, 125 billion disappeared into thin air, or hundreds of offshore accounts. No one was really sure. My father refused to admit anything, but the dozens of charges leveled by the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice would ensure he spent the rest of his life in federal prison. And after the cross I'd just been subjected to, It was clear the assistant U.S. attorney thought I should be joining him in the orange jumpsuit. If trusting your father was a crime, he'd be right about that too. I exited the courtroom, running down the marble stairs through the gauntlet of shouting reporters, dodging the microphones and cameras they shoved in my face. Charlotte, did you know? Charlotte, where's the money? Charlotte, are you being charged? Did you cut a deal? They battled me with questions until I dove into a waiting cab and slammed the door. East 60th and 3rd, please. My plan was simple. Have the cabbie drop me off a couple of blocks away from my home and sneak into the service entrance of our building without being seen or recognized. My strawberry blonde hair, heavy on strawberry, was too distinctive. That would be the first thing to go as soon as I got out of this town. I clutched my purse to my chest. My future, a one-way ticket to Atlanta, where I could disappear to my final destination, was tucked inside. I was flying coach for the first time in my life, a fact I wasn't proud of. I bundled my hair into a low bun and fished a giant pair of sunglasses and a scarf out of my purse, somewhat disguised. I kept my head down until the car slowed to a stop. Tossing some bills at the cabbie, I slid out of the taxi. The service elevator trundled its way up 51 floors, stopping at the penthouse. My hands shook as I typed in the code required to enter. Pushing the door open, I stepped into the cavernous, ultra-modern space that was my family's Manhattan home. After the inevitable guilty verdict came down, it became the property of the federal government along with the rest of the meager assets that the FBI had managed to find and freeze. To finance my escape, I cashed in $20,000 worth of savings bonds I found tucked into my First Communion Bible. I tried not to dwell on the irony of the salvation being found in the good book. My one bag was already packed, but a casual observer would never know I had taken anything from my walk-in closet. The racks of designer suits and culture my mother insisted I wear were untouched. The shelves of Mananos and Louboutins were intact. They had no place in my future. I never put on another suit or walked into Augusta's Investments or any other reputable company. Never applied to Wharton and get my MBA. I naively thought I could somehow atone for the sins of my father by throwing myself into charity work. Put my newly earned finance degree to work for a good cause. I've been laughed out of every organization I visited over the last 2 months. No one wanted me, and I couldn't blame them. I wouldn't trust anyone with my last name either. After the last rejection, I come to the decision I would never use my degree for my own benefit, ever. I didn't deserve it. I might have earned it myself, but how could I profit from it with good conscience? Along with that decision came a stark realization. I had no future in this city, where I'd forever be watching under a cloud of suspicion, so I started planning my escape. I stripped out of my black Saint Laurent wool blazer and a V-neck dress and hung them up in their appropriate places. I pulled on a pair of black skinny jeans, an American Apparel tank and hoodie, and the contraband pair of black Chucks I kept hidden in the bottom of my closet. This was the new me. This was the me who would never set foot in this penthouse again. After I dressed, I left my cell phone on the dresser, hefted a black duffel bag over my shoulder, and headed through the kitchen to the staff entrance. It seemed fitting. Come in the front door one way and leave out the back a different person. Juanita, the housekeeper, who had been part of my life for all of my 22 years, blocked the doorway. She looked pointedly at my attire and duffel. And where do you think you're going? Somewhere else. As much as I wanted to tell her where, I couldn't. I wanted her to have plausible deniability. She wrapped me in a soft, familiar arms and hugged me. Lisette Augusta didn't hug, and she would cringe to see me hugging the help. For the daughter of a plumber from upstate New York, she'd had no problems becoming a classic bitch. You can't run from this, sweetheart. I drew back, loathing releasing her from what might be the last time, and met her kind brown eyes. I know, but I can try. I took a sealed envelope from the pocket of my duffel and held it out. Could you make sure my mother get this? She gave me a sad smile. I threw myself into her arms one more time. I kissed her papery cheeks and blinked back the gathering tears. Thank you for everything. She stepped back and her chapped hands cupped my face. Charlotte, just because you are your father's daughter does not make you like him. I nodded because she would argue with me until the end of time to prove her point. But she was wrong about this one. I was my father's daughter, his blood, raised in his image to follow in his footsteps. If he was capable of that kind of evil, what was I capable of? I never wanted to find out. I kissed her cheek one more time and opened the door, leaving behind the only life I'd ever known. Chapter 2. Simon. 1 year later, New Orleans, Louisiana. Getting Maddie's name tattooed on your ass is the worst fucking idea you've ever had, and that's saying something. A metallic ding sounded, and a rush of cold air hit me as Nate and I followed Derek into Voodoo Inc., hoping to hell I could talk him out of it. Not only would I be the worst best man in the history of the planet, but Mandy would have my ass. There was no way this wouldn't end up being my fault. Flash drawings papered the black wall. Tiny prickles of light twinkled in the ceiling, which was swirled with white, red, and black paint. They looked like a million stars in an apocalypse sky. The place was creepy, but it had a phenomenal reputation. She's gonna fucking love it, man. I know my woman, Derek said, his words slurring. I shrugged, hoping this place would refuse to tattoo his drunken ass. A petite woman dressed in skinny jeans and a tight white tank top strolled out from a hallway to stand behind the counter. Her hair hung in waves that stopped midway down her back. The tangles of black were interspersed with sections dyed deep red and purple. Tattoos started at her shoulders and continued down to her wrists. Some were words, other intricate black and gray drawings. Even more were brilliantly colored, swirling designs. She narrowed her eyes, sizing us up. I picture us from her perspective. 3 guys dressed in jeans and partially unbuttoned dress shirts, courtesy of the strippers we barely escaped. We probably looked like douchebags. And one of us wanted his ass tattooed. Yeah, total fucking douchebags. What can I do you for, gentlemen? She tilted her head and watched as Derek stumbled into one of the waiting room chairs. I yanked him back and steadied him. I want a tattoo right here. Derek slapped the right side of his ass, of my bride's name. The woman tilted her head the other direction. What about that seems like a good idea to you? She asked. She'll fucking love it. She pursed her lips. Doubtful. She looked at me for the first time. Bachelor party? I nodded, tongue gone thick. Her aqua eyes speared me. I'd never seen eyes that color. Her features were delicate, with high cheekbones and a slightly turned up nose. Now see, that's how you describe a beautiful woman. Her dark and vibrant hair seemed at odds with her creamy pale skin. The combination of her hair, eyes, and tattoo was striking, more intoxicating than the dozen or so drinks I've already consumed. She was the polar opposite of the perfectly coiffed and manicured woman my parents pushed at me. I couldn't think of a word that didn't sound stupid even in my head. I'm afraid we can't help you. We have a strict no dumb fucking idiot tattoo policy for drunk people. Come on, don't be like that, Derek said. Nate added, you're like 2 blocks off Bourbon. You got a tattoo drunk people all the time. She pointed to the sign on the wall. It read, NOLA, to-do list, get tattooed, get wasted. We're sticklers. Come back tomorrow after you're done puking. If you still want your future wife's name on your ass, Delilah or Khan will be happy to do it. Have a good night. She faked a smile and nodded to the door. We'd been dismissed. Derek whined, but followed as Nate led him outside. My feet were rooted to the black and white checkered linoleum floor. Even through the haze of alcohol, one thought stuck out. I couldn't leave without getting her name. What's your name? I asked. Her narrow gaze landed on me, and she started to turn away. No, I couldn't let her leave without finding out her name. It might have been a drunken compulsion, but it was a compulsion all the same. I reached across the counter and grabbed her wrist. She froze. We have a problem here, Lee? A tall, blond man dressed in a faded Jimi Hendrix t-shirt and ripped jeans tattooed from neck to wrist sauntered out of the back room. He stopped next to Lee and wrapped an arm around her, pulling her into him. The gesture was so possessive that even my drunk ass couldn't miss it. I dropped her wrist. No problem. Just wanted to know her name. He raised an eyebrow. Under the ink, he was still the punk who gotten expelled from our prep school for hotboxing the athletic director office. If I recall correctly, he ended up in military school after that stunt. Constantine Lear. Well, fuck. It's fine, Khan. I'm good. We was just leaving. A second dismissal, and it blew. Khan looked at me, his eyes not giving anything away. He glanced down to the tattoo on the inside of my forearm. We touch up work for vets for free. Come on back anytime, before you start tipping them back. He jerked his chin toward the sign. I stared at his hand curling around her waist. It was too familiar to be an act. They looked like a perfect couple, all ink and fuck you attitudes. Thanks, I'll keep that in mind. I turned and walked away. I told myself it was for the best. She wasn't for me, but those eyes. Chapter 3. Charlie. Was the caveman act really necessary? I asked Khan, my boss friend and sometimes fuck buddy, as I stepped out of his hole. You can't tell me he wasn't trying to pick you up and take you home. Maybe I wanted him to. Our arrangement was completely open. The only rule, if you weren't with someone else, you had to get tested before we got together again. Well, I guess it was really my rule for Khan. I hadn't yet needed to get tested, but he regularly went home with other women. I felt no jealousy. I used Khan to feel close to someone occasionally, and it didn't hurt that he was a stellar lay. He was the only guy who touched me in more than a casual way since I left New York. I shoved the thought of home to the back of my brain. After all, it wasn't home anymore. I'd done days without thinking about my old life. It was a game I played. How long could I go without remembering? I was getting better at it. Sex, booze, and tattoos helped. Although I was a little light on the sex portion of the equation lately. It's been over 2 months since I've been with Khan. Yeah, right. He wasn't exactly your type. Really? I pointed at the door. Did you see the same guy I did? Because he was every woman's type. Tall, broad shoulders with dark hair styled in that artful, messy way, a little stubble on his jaw and flashing hazel eyes. The military ink on the inside of his corded forearm was pretty hot, too. A little straight edge for me, Lee. Trust me. Plus, you shouldn't even be thinking about leaving here with some guy you just met. I thought you were smarter than that. Khan frowned down at me. I winced, feeling guilty and knowing he was right. In my quest to lie as little as possible about my past, I let people assume whatever they wanted about my motives for keeping a low profile. Khan's assumption: I was running from an abusive boyfriend. Some days I wished that was the truth, and then I wanted to kick my own ass for feeling sorry for myself and thinking my messed up situation was anywhere near as bad as a battered woman. Besides, I didn't deserve pity, even from myself. I looked at the clock. You care if I head out? I'm working on an early shift tomorrow. He smoothed my hair back from my face. You work too damn hard. I wish you just let me. His statement trailed off when I looked away. It was a conversation we had too many times to count. Get your mutt and get out of here, Lee. Khan was the only person who called me Lee. He claimed was it he claimed I was too sexy to be called by a guy's name. Whatever. Thankfully, given what he assumed to be my situation, he paid me under the table and had never asked to see my ID. So I let him call me whatever the hell he wanted. I grinned. Thanks, boss. I whistled shrilly, and he clamped his hands over his ears. Jesus, fuck, was that necessary? That's for cock blocking me. Khan rolled his eyes as my brittle mutt trotted out of the back room. His head came up past the counter, and he stood 30 inches tall at his haunches. Huck and I arrived in New Orleans on the same day 1 year earlier, or so I've been told. I met him on my third day in the Crescent City. He was the newest resident of the Humane Society of New Orleans, and I was their newest volunteer. I took one look at the 30-pound of roly-poly bear cub looking pup and begged Harriet, my honorary grandmother and landlord, if she allowed a pet. She agreed. When I learned that he'd been found floating down the Mississippi on a pile of plywood and old tires, I realized that he was my very own Huckleberry Finn. Fast forward 1 year and another 130 pounds, and Huck and I were inseparable. The best I could figure, he was a cross between an English Mastiff and a Great Dane. I wasn't sure what other combination would produce such a monster. He was my baby, my guardian, and an irreplaceable part of the new family I built. Unfortunately, my volunteering had been curtailed by my crazy work schedule. Khan smacked my ass and Huck growled softly. Stow it, mutt. I'll let you sleep on my goddamn couch. Khan held out a hand and Huck headbutted it. I wonder if Khan had been someone Huck didn't know, whether he might have lost that hand. It was a theory I didn't want to test. Get out of here then, girl. I'll see you tomorrow. Khan leaned down and brushed a kiss across my temple. I snagged my bag from the break room and headed out the back door. I unchained my pale blue Schwinn and hooked a leash to Huck's collar. He tolerated the indignity for appearance, a leash law's sake. Oh, wait. He tolerated the indignity for appearance and leash law's sake. Given the thick Friday night crowd, I opted to walk my bike instead of ride. Jimmy, my favorite hot dog vendor, was set up on the corner of Bourbon and St. Louis. He grinned and waved his tongs as I slipped through the mass of people. You want the usual, Miss Charlie? Yes, sir. One with everything and one plain. He handed me one hot dog wrapped and the other one unwrapped. Huck sat at my feet, licking his chops. He knew how this worked. He downed his in 2 head-jerk bites. I shook my head. Someday you'll learn to savor your food, I swear. I looked up at Jimmy. Have a good night. I'll see you tomorrow. It's a date, Miss Charlie. To be sure, it's a date. I pushed my bike and the drunken revelers, I know that word, I just stumbled, parted like the Red Sea. It was a common occurrence when traveling with Huck. The rangy stride was pure king of the beast. Hold on. And he looked mean as fuck, so no one bothered us. A half mile later, I dug out my keys and unlocked the narrow wrought iron gate that blocked off the passage leading to my secret garden oasis. Okay, Harriet's secret garden oasis, but she let me use it. Locking the gate behind me, I unclipped Huck's leash, and he trotted over to his designated grassy section. After he'd taken care of business, we ascended the wrought iron spiral staircase that led to my 500 square foot apartment. It had hardwood floors, a space that could loosely be called a kitchen, and an itty bitty bathroom, and skylights dotting the ceiling throughout. It might be tiny and humble, but it was mine. Well, again, it was Harriet's, but she leased it to me. The woman was my very own fairy godmother. She was the grandmother of my crazy best friend from college, the one who my mother begged me not to befriend because she had tattoos, and even worse, she was a Democrat. Lena was actually more of a socialist, but I didn't tell my mother that. After college, she opted for a stint in the Peace Corps and was now living in Madagascar. Beyond being a fantastic, though long distance friend, Lena had begged Harriet to let me rent the place. So when I showed up, fresh off the Greyhound from Atlanta, with my newly black hair still reeking of cheap dye, she'd taken me in with open arms. I paid fair rent, but Harriet treated me like more than a tenant. A shrewd businesswoman who owned several shops in the quarter, Harriet preferred to spend her time painting and traveling the country showing off her art. She farmed out management. She'd farmed out management of the shops to trusted employees, one of whom had agreed to hire me, despite the fact that Harriet was my landlord, which was the reason I had an early shift tomorrow morning at Dirty Dog, a vintage clothing and novelty shop. I looked at the clock and sighed. It'd be another night of too little sleep. I scrubbed the heavy black eyeliner from around my lids and slathered on face cream before curling up in bed. I reached out a hand to ruffle Huck's fur where he slept on the rug. With my other hand, I traced the ink on my arm, revealed by the dim glow from the skylight. With each line, the needle buzzed into my skin. I was another step removed from my former life. The tattoos had become more than camouflage to hide the girl I once been. They were a declaration that I was never going back. I permanently marked myself to ensure that I could never again fit into the life I previously led, the life I'd run from rather than face every day as my father's daughter, rather than face the constant questioning by the FBI and the chance that the Department of Justice would eventually decide that despite the truth I spoken on the stand, I was somehow culpable for my father's crimes. I could freely admit it had been cowardly to run, but at least by running, I gave myself a shot at having some sort of future. A future where my every breath wouldn't be scrutinized and dissected. Each tat was conscious, deliberate choices to move toward the new me. I'd taken the tiny spark that had always burned to rebel against my mother's directives as she groomed me into a perfect society princess, and I fanned the flames. The irony of it was, even though I had assumed a false identity, I was finally discovering the real me. All it took was ripping off the blinders I've worn for 22 years. Okay, so I read chapter 1 through 3, and next would be chapter 4. I didn't run into any words that I didn't know the definition of or didn't know how to pronounce, so there will not be a definition video. So until my next video, see you in chapter 4. Bye.